On Sunday, August 7, 2016, 27-year-old New York City resident Anastasia Marcotte came to visit her mother in the small town of Princeton, Massachusetts. This quiet and cozy suburb, home to only about 3,000 people, is located not far from major cities like Boston and Worcester. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Anastasia, who was in a good mood, decided to go for a walk alone in the local park. She had always led an active lifestyle and loved running, power walking, practicing yoga, and simply enjoying walking her favorite routes. The weather that day was exceptionally nice, warm and sunny, so the young woman, as usual, couldn't miss the opportunity to admire the wonderful scenery. Moreover, the area was very familiar to her, as she often visited her mother. However, when several hours passed and Vanessa still hadn't returned home, her mother Rosanna began to seriously worry. The woman tried to call her daughter, but she wasn't answering. This was extremely unusual for Vanessa, to disappear for a long time and be out of reach, because due to her work she always kept her phone at hand. Rosanna couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. The situation seemed highly suspicious to her. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she contacted the police with a request to search for her daughter in the park. Law enforcement took a statement from the mother and immediately went to search for the missing woman, using service dogs. For several hours, police carefully combed the park where Vanessa had gone for a walk. At about 8:30 p.m., only a kilometer away from the house, in the thick bushes of a remote part of the park, a dog led officers to a human body. A gruesome scene unfolded before their eyes. The young woman's body, completely naked and mutilated, was lying on the ground. Police suspected that the crime was motivated and the girl had been raped. There were clear traces of burns on her skin, particularly on her head, arms and legs. Obviously, the criminal had tried to get rid of the body and hide the traces in this way, but his plan had failed. The body had not burned completely. The officers immediately suspected that they had found the body of the missing Vanessa, whom they were looking for. The deceased strongly resembled her. This assumption was later confirmed by an expert examination, and the mother had to be informed of the terrible news. According to the forensic medical examiner, the girl was brutally raped. She was strangled with such force that her hyoid bone was broken. Other injuries characteristic of a struggle were also found. Vanessa had desperately defended herself and fought for her life to the last, as evidenced by the defensive wounds on her hands. Genetic material of the killer, which was sent for examination, was found under the victim's fingernails. In parallel, investigators began studying the identity of the deceased in order to determine her circle of contacts and identify possible suspects. It turned out that Vanessa was the only child in the family. Her parents adored their daughter and were proud of her. From a young age, Vanessa was distinguished by a developed intellect and quick wits. She easily mastered new knowledge. At school, she was the best student and an overachiever. In addition, beautiful and kind, she attracted people to her and knew how to make anyone feel at ease. These qualities served her well in adulthood. In 2011, Vanessa graduated with honors from Boston University with a degree in public relations. After that, she worked in several IT companies, and at the beginning of 2015, she got her dream job at Google as a client manager. The young woman was able to fully realize her potential and made ambitious plans for career growth. Vanessa successfully fulfilled her duties, and brilliant prospects opened up before her. She sincerely loved her work and saw great opportunities in it. But, unfortunately, the girl's life was tragically cut short in the prime of her life, when she was only 27. At first, detectives did not rule out that Vanessa's murder might be related to the murder of Karina Vetrano, which took place in New York a few days before the attack on Vanessa. Karina was also alone in the park during her daily jog when she was attacked. However, the course of the investigation showed that a connection between these two crimes was unlikely. The distance between the cities was too great, and the nature of the injuries on the bodies of the dead girls differed significantly. Soon, the attacker on Karina was found and arrested. It was also proven that he had never been to Princeton. Detectives suspected that in the Vanessa murder case, they should look for someone from the local residence or a person who often visited this area, possibly in connection with work nearby. In any case, it had to be a man who was well acquainted with the surrounding area, but at the same time did not stand out in any special way. Police made every effort to find eyewitnesses to the attack or any recordings from video surveillance cameras near the crime scene. After all, everything happened in broad daylight on a Sunday, in a fairly crowded place. That day, the park was filled with vacationers who came there with their entire families. But all attempts were in vain, none of the park visitors saw or heard anything. And, as luck would have it, there were no cameras installed nearby. Then investigators decided to seek help from the public by involving the media. This appeal sparked an extraordinary response. The police phones were literally ringing off the hook from calls from concerned citizens who shared their versions and guesses. A lot of time had to be spent checking all this information, although for the most part it turned out to be useless. However, there were also important leads. For example, one of the drivers reported that he had seen a dark SUV with an open hood not far from the place where Vanessa's body was found. Next to the vehicle was a man whose behavior seemed extremely suspicious to the witness. He was clearly nervous, looking for something under the hood, and constantly looking around. The driver even managed to give a fairly detailed description of this guy. According to him, it was a Latino man of athletic build, medium height, with a shaved head or very short hair. He looked about 30 years old. The eyewitness suggested that he had seen the same vehicle earlier, and it seemed as if it was following Vanessa. Another witness recalled seeing a girl who looked like Vanessa talking on the phone in the park right after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Based on these testimonies, the police narrowed down the time frame of the murder. It must have occurred between 1 o'clock and 3 p.m. Unfortunately, no one was able to remember the vehicle's license plate number. Weeks passed, and investigators still had no suspects. The public began accusing the police department of a sloppy investigation. People were horrified by the very thought that a brutal killer was freely roaming somewhere nearby, and demanded that he be caught and put behind bars as soon as possible. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the police did not give up and worked tirelessly on the case. For the quiet town of Princeton, this was the first murder of its kind in the last 3 decades, so it's not surprising that the whole city was buzzing like a stirred-up beehive. Law enforcement was supported by vigilant residents who did not take their eyes off all suspicious characters and reported the slightest thing to the cops. It took investigators almost 8 months to compile a profile of the probable criminal based on the evidence obtained and information received from citizens. Among the material evidence was the killer's DNA, extracted from under Vanessa's fingernails, as well as traces of gasoline on the girl's hair tie and socks. Obviously, the criminal was going to burn the body to cover his tracks. According to police data, the wanted man was of medium height, had an athletic build, a Latin American appearance, and drove a black SUV that was seen near the crime scene. Cops also assumed that there might be scratches on his face, hands, and back. After all, Vanessa had desperately fought for her life. All state patrol officers received an orientation on the suspect. They had to be on high alert and respond immediately if they noticed someone similar. And so, in March 2017, one observant police officer from Worcester reported that he had seen a dark SUV driven by a man who closely matched the description. The patrolman managed to write down the license plate number of the suspicious vehicle and passed the information on to his colleagues who were working on Vanessa's case. However, when detectives ran the number through the database, they still could not establish the identity of the owner. But they were able to find out his home address. That's where they headed, intending to talk to the man and take a sample of his DNA. The suspect became the 325th person whose biological material was collected as part of this investigation. He did not resist and voluntarily provided a sample. The man's appearance closely resembled the description of the driver seen near the crime scene. It seemed there was no longer any hope for a breakthrough in the investigation. But the results of the DNA examination were a real sensation. the genetic material removed from under the nails of the deceased Vanessa completely matched the sample obtained from the suspect. Having such irrefutable evidence, the court issued an arrest warrant. The detainee turned out to be 31-year-old Angelo Colon-Ortiz, a family man and father of 3 children. A native of Puerto Rico, he had moved to the United States with his family and settled in Worcester less than a year ago. Prior to that, Angelo had no problems with the law and led the quiet life of a decent citizen. He got a job as a courier for the FedEx delivery service and often visited Princeton and the surrounding areas for work. Since the suspect had poor English skills, he was provided with an interpreter for interrogation. Angelo insisted that he was not acquainted with the deceased girl and had never met her before. The man could not remember whether he was in Princeton on the day of Vanessa's murder, and, of course, he had no way to confirm his alibi. However, by that time, detectives had already obtained some important information. They found out that on August 7, 2016, the day of Vanessa's disappearance, at 2:35 p.m., Angelo had purchased $5 worth of gasoline at a store near the ill-fated park. So, the suspect was definitely near the crime scene at the right time. After carefully examining the calls and messages on the phones of the victim and Angelo, investigators found no connection between them. It seems that the killer and his victim were strangers. It was an absolutely random attack. Despite the fact that Angelo was immediately formally charged with the murder of Vanessa, he continued to deny his guilt. The suspect was kept in custody without the right to bail. The prosecution argued that Angelo had ambushed the girl at a moment when she was alone on the trail and attacked her from the bushes. The man forcibly tore the phone out of her hands and then brutally beat her. The petite Vanessa desperately resisted, but she had almost no chance against an adult man of athletic build. The autopsy showed that the girl suffered numerous injuries: strangulation, fracture of the hyoid bone, blunt force trauma to the head, nose, torso, upper extremities. Traces of burns were also found on the body. The immediate cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation. During the court session, the prosecutor delivered a moving speech dedicated to the problem of women's safety on the streets. He emphasized that the attack occurred in broad daylight, in a crowded place. Vanessa had every right to feel protected while walking in the park. But the brutal criminal decided otherwise. At the cost of incredible efforts, in an unequal battle, the girl managed to wrest from her fate the most valuable evidence, the genetic material of her own killer. She paid with her life, but thanks to her courage, this atrocity did not go unpunished. However, the defendant's lawyer continued to insist on his client's innocence. He claimed that due to his poor knowledge of English, Angelo did not fully understand what he was signing when he consented to the DNA samples being taken. Allegedly, the form was translated into Spanish with errors, so the suspect did not realize that he had the right to refuse. On this basis, the defense petitioned to exclude from the case file the main evidence of the prosecution, Angelo's biological samples obtained by the state police in March 2017. The lawyer insisted that they were obtained in violation of procedural norms due to incorrect translation. Disputes about the legality of obtaining DNA samples and the accuracy of the translation of documents lasted for more than one day. The testimonies of the police officers who communicated with the suspect, as well as the interpreters involved, were heard. They all claimed that the form in Spanish was read aloud to Angelo, after each section asking if everything was clear to him. In response, the man either gave an affirmative answer or nodded his head. Having weighed all the facts, the judge rejected the lawyer's motion. In his opinion, Angelo's rights were not violated, and the DNA samples were obtained legally. Therefore, they can be included as evidence in the trial. During the hearing, Vanessa's mother told the jury about her daughter. Through tears, the woman recalled their last meeting. That Sunday morning, the girl was smiling and in a wonderful mood. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. No one could imagine that they were seeing Vanessa alive for the last time. The mother had no apprehensions. Her daughter had simply gone for a walk in the park, as she often did on weekends. A crowded place, broad daylight, what could happen? The grief-stricken woman told those present about the emptiness and unbearable pain of loss, about the burden she had to bear during the investigation and trial. She will never again see her daughter achieve new heights in her career, she will not share the joys of her personal life with her. She will not help Vanessa try on her wedding dress, she will not hug her grandchildren, because the girl was the only child in the family. The mother will grow old in loneliness, because who will take care of her? Her husband died shortly before the trial, unable to bear the grief. Through tears, the woman told the jurors that she would never forget or forgive what this monster had done. The wound in her heart will never heal. At first, the defendant denied his guilt in every possible way. But faced with irrefutable evidence and after consulting with his lawyer, he still decided to make a deal with the investigation and pleaded guilty. Obviously, Angelo hoped in this way to mitigate his sentence. However, the answer to the main questions, what pushed him to this terrible crime and how it all happened, was never heard. Thanks to the plea deal with the prosecutor's office, the charge of against Angelo was dropped. After deliberation, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and robbery. In October 2022, Angelo was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder with the right to parole after 25 years, plus 20 years in prison for robbery. The terms were to be served consecutively, one after the other. Thus, the convict will be able to apply for early release only after serving at least 45 years. The grief-stricken mother readily agreed to such a deal. She wanted to avoid a long and exhausting process during which she would have to listen again and again to the horrifying details of the last minutes of her child's life. The woman only dreamed of one thing, for the nightmare to finally end. Upon hearing the sentence, she expressed hope that the prison doors would close behind the killer forever and he would never again be able to harm anyone. The tragedy inspired Vanessa's mother to dedicate the rest of her life to the fight against violence. In 2017, together with a group of like-minded people, the woman founded a charitable organization named after her deceased daughter. The foundation conducts educational campaigns, organizes seminars and self-defense courses for women, and holds runs in Vanessa's memory. The news of Angelo's arrest came as a real shock to his wife. She had no idea that all these years she had been living under the same roof with a real monster who had raped and brutally killed a young girl, and then returned home to their 3 children. The woman still cannot believe that her beloved, an exemplary family man and caring father, turned out to be such a murderous pervert. Immediately after Angelo's arrest, his wife filed for divorce. She completely severed all contact with her former husband. The woman does not want the children to know anything about their father and his terrible crime. Let him remain dead to them forever, it will be better that way. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.